Welcome to a reflection and a recap and a deep breath as the 2025 trade period comes to a close here on the Blue Abroad YouTube channel. In this video, I want to unpack what happened on deadline day. I want to take a step back, zoom out for a minute, get a recap of what happened over the entire period for the Carlton Football Club and, plug some holes that were left in the storylines, wrap it all up in a nice bow, and then farewell what has been a fascinating experience covering the trade period. So maybe we should start with last night, deadline day. And that obviously pertains to the Charlie Curnow deal. Maybe even before the Charlie Curnow deal, we can just quickly touch on the fact that Buku Khamis and that deal didn't happen. We were fortunate to speak to Chris Davies about that. He detailed exactly how he felt about the deal and how it played out.
Look, we tried really hard with that, and I'm disappointed that we weren't able to bring Buku in. But yeah, the club went to the Bulldogs a number of times with different opportunities. There were picks on the table that we had with them earlier in the trade period, which they declined. And so from that perspective, you move on. You've got to do the other deals that you've got at play. And so, I'm disappointed we weren't able to get that done. We'll need to sit back now and think about, okay, so who are the players that we might be able to bring in, whether that be from a draft perspective or from, a train-on standpoint, or is there a delisted free agent that we might be able to add in that space.
And so Buku Khamis, who is out of contract next year, that's one to watch. We'll see if that's a situation that we chase next year. And I do wonder whether or not that impacts the Mitch McGovern storyline and whether or not we end up retaining Mitch McGovern. I also am curious about Elijah Hollins as well. Maybe we can touch on that later. So then we get to the Charlie Curnow deal. I mean, for those of you who were tuned in to the deadline day stream, that was fun. That was fun. And the overarching feeling I have at the moment is just relief and closure. Now, in an ideal world, we aren't even in the situation. Charlie's fully committed. Charlie's figured it out. Charlie's matured and grown up and put the foot down and dug his heel in and become a leader and helped be part of the turnaround for Carlton after a really poor season. But that wasn't what happened. And oftentimes in life, it doesn't go the way you want it to. So the next best scenario was to get a good deal done for the club and make sure that all the loose ends this year and in the future were tied up. And I think that's ultimately what happened. I think just recounting that, I mean, we had referenced 2019 trade period and, the Papley deal falling through and Pommy and I on the stream counting down and nobody walking into the room and that deal falling over. I really do think we'll look back on the 2025 deadline day stream as one of the all-time classics. It was fun. It had drama. We were following the Zach Merritt Hawthorne deal that fell over as well. So that it had so many elements to it. I don't know if you enjoyed it as much as what we did, but we had a ball and we had a blast. And it's really cool to be able to have experienced that with 1,000 people watching and just together and getting the instant reaction. So there's that. Now, Charlie Curnow, bottom line, what happened? What happened? What was the deal that got done? It looks like this. So Charlie Curnow, pick 31, pick 42, and a 2027 second round pick goes to Sydney in exchange for Will Hayward and 3 first round picks. So that's pick 11 this year, Sydney's first round pick next year, Sydney's first round pick 2027. So that ultimately is what happened. Now, I want to unpack 3 versions of events about how the deal got done. And maybe we'll start with Chris Davies, who spoke about the deal.
CD, how can we ever believe anything that you tell us? Vossi said he wouldn't pick up the phone for offers for Curnow. You said he's a Carlton player. He's got 4 years left. What changed?
Well, I think that we all said through the period that if anything was going to change, it was going to need to be a significant deal. And I don't think you need to look any further into what I said other than, we wanted Charlie to be a Carlton player into the future. Now, Charlie made it clear throughout the trade period and before that even that he was wanting to leave our footy club. And so it was then our responsibility to have a think about what we thought was best for the footy club, both in 2026 and long term. And I'm pleased with the outcome, Kane. I'm really pleased. I think that, as I say, across the ground, I think we're better.
No, you should be pleased. What's his body like, Charlie Curnow? Did that play?
That's one of them that we considered, and that's not to suggest that we had overly concerning aspects of Charlie's body, but it's certainly something that you think about in these situations.
So then there's the Sydney point of view. Chris Keane here talking about the deal, and also, interestingly enough, talking about when the first contact was made with Charlie.
It was pretty frantic towards the end, and I think both parties probably were holding firm and holding the line on what they were willing to give up. And at the end of the day, we reached a common ground there at the end with that 20.
When did you get wind that he was interested in a potential move?
It's hard to put a exact time frame on it, Cal. It was probably towards the back end of the year, without being too specific. But when there's a type of player like and the calibre of player like Charlie Curnow that potentially has an interest in joining your footy club, then that's our job and my job to explore that as much as we can, and ultimately we're able to get it over the line and bring him into the footy club, which is really exciting for everyone involved, and certainly our supporters and members should look forward to what he can do out on the SCG next year. Now,
let's just cut the shit. He knows exactly when he reached out to Charlie. So there is that. So we have seen throughout this period the games, and that is you can be frustrated by it, which it is frustrating, but I think also you just have to lean into it and sort of succumb to the entertainment, drama, roller coaster that it is. Otherwise, I don't know if you could really enjoy trade period at all. I think it would do your head in. So obviously the public statements are all part of a wider game of chess, we'll call it. So bottom line, it got done. I just want to recap the moment that it got done, because Pommy and I are watching. The deal hadn't been done. There's about 6 minutes to go. What I found really interesting was Robbie D'Orazio, Charlie's manager. When he initially walked in the room, he seemed to have just an air of confidence about him and, leaning over the chair. And then by the time he got to that last half an hour, that grin was off his face. He was stressed. And I'm happy about that. As a little bit of a competitor, I wanted him to feel, I didn't want it to go as smoothly as what he was posturing with his confidence, because he's a representative of Charlie. And Charlie throughout this process has been pretty mute. We've only seen him twice. We saw him when he was getting in the car at Icon Park, reiterating to Xander Maguire that he was staying at Carlton. And then we saw him with, I don't know what that stunt was the other day at Sydney, smiling and grinning. And so, Robbie D'Orazio is doing the best for him, but it got to the point where he had to bring in Daddy and had to bring in the big dog, Mr. Paul Connors, into the room. And so they get into the room. Oh, mate, it's Goldberg. This is like a Goldberg type entrance. Hands in pockets.
How good would that be, Terry, if they just had sparks?
And he starts headbutting the lockers.
Oh, Sydney and Cowan's room.
Here we go. Oh, yeah.
Go on. Shaking hands, smiling.
Pay up. No money, no honey. Pay up.
Pay up, you wankers.
Yeah, pay up.
This deal's definitely been done, because that body language was thank you very much.
There it is. Oh, that's a deal. That's a deal. And then obviously the deal gets done and, happy days. Now, I want to get on to some comments. Robbie D'Orazio spoke on two separate occasions here. The first one was about the deal.
Sydney were pretty hell-bent on not giving up 3 first, and Carlton were hell-bent on getting 3 first. So that was always the sticking point, especially the 2027 first-round pick. In the end, that was probably the one that both clubs wanted to hold, but we managed to get there.
So that's, again, just reiterating, the sticky point there being that third first-round pick, which, we'll touch on that shortly. And then the second one here, he spoke to our man, David Zeta. This is what he had to say.
Why did he want to leave?
Look, Charlie just probably in the end needed a fresh start. His footy probably did stifle a little bit this year. And maybe, there was a lot of talk about getting out of the bubble. But Charlie's a competitor. He just wants the best out of himself. And maybe just having a fresh set of eyes and new teammates around him. Charlie's a big character in the room, and his ups and downs can sometimes affect that. So,
comment there about his character, Charlie's character, and, the ups and the downs and affecting the locker room. I found that to be really interesting. I hope, and I don't know if it can and will happen, I hope we get an opportunity to speak to Charlie. And I really do. I'd like to hear from him. I mean, it's done now. We move on. The closure is there. He's going to Sydney. It isn't ideal from a Carlton point of view because it just means we probably have to take a bit of a step back maybe. On the positive, we, even out the depth of the list, bring in some quality characters, I would say. I think that's the most important thing there. We bring in culture players. We bring in guys who play roles in good teams. So Ben Ainsworth has played a selfless role in a good team that played finals football. Will Hayward and Ollie Florent, Will Hayward in particular, he plays a selfless role in a good team that's been good for quite some time. Now, the Swans were poor this year, but, for the most part, they've been really good. They've both got finals experience. They've both played 184 games. And so I think, you can talk about how that deal played out, but the reality is both players are in Carlton's best version of its team. So there's that. And I think they'll bring a positive influence to the locker room as well. And so we get the 3 first-round picks that we wanted, and maybe we can thank Geelong for starting the bidding with 3 first-round picks, because what we ended up getting was, I guess, 3 first-round picks plus a player who, on the open market, it's said to be a first-round pick. So from that point of view, it's done. Again, you're not replacing Charlie Curnow and what he's capable of doing in a season. But I think what we are doing is we are shoring ourselves up as a team and as a club and making sure that all the loose ends are tied up, as I said earlier in the video. And yeah, I think, like I said earlier, just to have that closure, and it's done now, and we can move on with our lives and, get on with it and, move on. I don't know how it plays out, but I am curious to see, does the Charlie Curnow scenario, does that bind us? I feel like it kind of binds us because we have a common, quote unquote enemy as the character of Charlie Curnow on the field. We don't hate him as a human being, but as the player and, the theatre of footy and the story of footy and the drama that we're all a part of, it's going to be really interesting to see how we all band together and, try and get under his skin when he's playing against Carlton. There's other storylines that emerge, maybe a bit more appreciation and love for Harry Mackay. The reality is we've got 2 guys in the forward line who are Coleman medal type forwards who would be the focal point of most AFL clubs if that was their only forward. So, Harry now gets an opportunity to really take more ownership of that forward line, and that's what we need. And, the conversation around Charlie being in the leadership group, I touched on it earlier, that's a hole that Carlton didn't fill. We didn't fill leadership in the forward line, and maybe Charlie was a little forced to fill that role. Maybe the club felt they need to push him to go up that level. And, the reality is I just don't think leadership and what we require from Charlie as a leader, I don't think he had it in him, and that's fine. Not all players are meant to be bona fide leaders on paper. Some of them just are really good players and they get the best out of themselves when they're playing on instinct. And I think that's where Charlie sits as well. So the Harry Mackay story there, Elijah Hollins, we don't know where that's going to play out. We didn't get Buku Khamis, and I don't know if we were going to play Buku, and I don't know if we were going to play him as a forward or a defender. So for me, I'm thinking, McGovern, Elijah, McGovern all of a sudden is a bit more important than what he was a week or 2 ago. And Elijah, again, don't know. There seems to be a bit of a fence-sitting narrative here. Do we pay him out? Do we give him an opportunity? Is he on top of his issues? Can he get himself fit mentally? Does he have the things in place that he needs to play footy and show up for himself and then for the football club? So that's a question that hasn't been answered yet. And so, yeah, it wraps up an amazing trade period. That was so much fun. We had so many guests that came on, Pommy, Joe, Paul, the fan channels that came on as well throughout trade period. We had journos come on, Sam McClure, David Zeta popped in, not so much on Trade TV, but throughout the period there. Xander Maguire, we had Alex Chincotta, Corey Durden come on and say a farewell. And, I think what has been a really disappointing year, we sort of got a little bit of a taste of the next door, and that is, the 2026 door. And it's a relief. It is a relief. And as frustrating as trade period can be, because, we ultimately followed the storylines day by day, and it can be a little bit frustrating, and it isn't healthy. I can tell you from this side, every day I'm sort of sitting there, almost don't want to leave too far away from the studio just in case breaking news happens. So you're in this state of, you're almost thinking and waiting for something to happen. It's a bit anxiety inducing. So you're waiting for something to happen that's relevant enough to film an update on. And then also, I'm a supporter as well. So I feel the emotions of it all. So that's been a really interesting experience, but it was really cool to do that sort of together. And it felt like every episode of Trade TV, every night that we did it, it just got more and more interesting. Even when we didn't have necessarily too much to speak about, there always seemed to be something with the live stream that popped up that made the show go longer than what I anticipated. And then finally, Chris Davies, who jumped on immediately after Trade Period was done. He did his interview with Carlton Media, did his interview on Trade Radio, and then, spent 10 minutes with us here on the channel and just called in live, which is, I think, a really significant point in time, because I think, Graham Wright, when he started as the CEO, he made it pretty clear that he had identified the need to connect better with the fans. And I think a 10-minute spot interview like that, just keeping it real with the situation, goes a long way. Now, I don't think we need to do that all the time, every month, but I do think occasionally, if not often, maybe a couple times a year, I think it's important to get those updates, not just from Chris, but whether it's Graham, the players, the leaders. I think we can help bind together the Carlton Football Club and its fans, because ultimately, and I know it might sound a little wishy-washy, but it is the truth. To be a great club, part of that means being connected as a whole. So, your supporters, your club, your players, your admin, everyone. And it's a very difficult task. It's easier said than done. But if we can get to a point where most of the football club and the people that follow the football club are all thinking in a very similar way and are all on board with what's happening, I think that's powerful. And I think that starts with honest communication from the club and just speaking in a manner that is just real. And I think we can tell when we're being sort of spun a little bit. Now, trade period's different because they have to play a game. But once it was done, I heard Chris Davies come on and he just kept it real. We were disappointed not to get Buku Kamas and things of that nature. So I think it's a good start. I'm not getting too excited about prospects for 2026 because you just can't. What I've learned a lot this year, and I've learned a lot in this trade period, and I think I'm a lot more aware of a few things. Well, firstly, David Zeta said something that was really interesting around, journos cop a bad rap, and they do. And I'm guilty of this as well. I can sometimes take it a little personally, but if journalists didn't exist to go and fish for stories, then all you would have is club PR. And that's something that stuck with me. And then secondly, I think just learning the art of understanding, fans, we want loyalty, we want this, we want that. Clubs are not always loyal to players. Players are not always loyal to clubs. The players are the ones in the arena. They make the best decisions for themselves and their family and their future. And ultimately, it's hard to knock that. Now, I don't like the way some of this played out. I don't like the way that Charlie, for example, the way he played out that whole scripted media thing in Sydney. I thought that was a little distasteful. And, from a fan's point of view, that doesn't sit well with me because I've loved Charlie and I still do love Charlie. I know that it's still pretty raw, but, we loved Charlie. We gave him all of our love. He was injured. He came back, and the 2 years that he was back, he played exciting football, and he was our spiritual talisman and our spiritual leader. And, so I don't forget those memories. He was part of quite a few core memories for me with this group and for a lot of us here. So maybe when the dust settles, we'll be able to feel that again. Carlton get a good deal. We shore up our future. And, you know, we now move into the next wave. And what does that look like? I don't know. I don't want to project. But I'd like to think that the group that show up for day one of preseason 2026 are going to be a group that is committed to each other, are going to be a group where there's not 3 or 4 dominoes who already have their eye outside of the club. You know, De Koning, Silvani and Curnow, that must have lingered all year. And it may not have been explicitly said for all of them, but if they had their minds elsewhere, that would have shown up in their day-to-day. And I think that is a really important piece of context for the year, because we have a lot of questions about what the fuck happened this year. So yeah, learnt a lot, and yeah, ultimately just want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in. Hope you enjoyed the coverage. It was fun. Friday we're going to do fan cams, and I'm going to give away the prize, the 12-month free Blue Abroad membership, and the match worn signed Guernsey signed by Corey Durden. So stay tuned for that. Last chance, if you want to enter that and be eligible for that prize, please fill out the 2025 Blue Abroad survey. It just gives me a chance to read through your experience, and I'm going to go away at the end of next month, and I'm going to really, have a think about what to add next year. Make sure that those of you who are signed up as paid members, I'm going to think of ways in which to add more value for you and just give back a bit more for those of you that support the channel financially. And yeah, we'll go from there. So share with me in the comments below your thoughts on trade period as a whole, the Charlie deal, the Buku deal, or anything, whatever's on your mind. Recap it below and we'll go from there.
Wow. Oh, he's pissed. That is a man that's promised his missus Fiji 5 stars. and you ain't going to Fiji, baby.
You're going to Ballarat.